Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. You are listening to episode 31 of Holding Down the Fort with Alejandro Soto. We got Phil back on the show. This is fun. I'm like a little over a year into the podcast project, and so I'm starting to have people back on the show. It's pretty sweet. I'm really, really excited about it. I'm glad this ship has not sunk, and that it is still sailing. So what have I got coming up? Let's see. This is coming out May 28th. So the Saturday, no, let me do this in temporal order. Thursday, May 30th, I'm going to be playing at Amanda McNamara's journal release. She's releasing the journal that she's been making to help out people with bipolar disorder, and she's going to be releasing that and signing it, and she asked me to play for a little while at the book release, so I'll be doing that. Pretty excited. And then Sunday, June 2nd, we've got an ecstatic dance at the Dance Collective at 6 o'clock. I'll be leading some stretches for a warm-up and then making the music playlist that we'll be dancing to. So join us at the Dance Collective, Sunday, June 2nd at 6. Let's see, Soulfest is coming up June 22nd, so you can find a link to tickets for that below. And then I'll be playing at the Three Rivers Festival as part of Art in the Park this year on Saturday and Sunday. That's July 13th and 14th from 10 to 12 a.m. I'll be playing in the morning. It's going to be a lot of fun. Before we get into this next episode, would you please consider joining the Patreon page for the show? It would really, really warm my heart, even if you just join the free tier. Right now, everything that I'm putting up on the Patreon is also going to the free tier. That may eventually change once I'm able to put more energy into this. If I have some more ideas, I want to do more of the radio shows, do more music, and that would be easiest to do on the paid tiers for the Patreon. So, if you want to help support the show, go join the Patreon. I'd appreciate it. I might even shoot you a special love message over the messaging apparatus that they have. There's an apparatus for sending messages on Patreon. So without further ado, check out the links to this next guest down in the show notes. There are a couple of his jazz albums for sale on Bandcamp. I've picked up 2 of them. They're really good. I was listening to them the other day, and yeah, really awesome stuff. Really good music. Check out his shows he's got coming up. Phil Plays Dead is at the Ruin this Friday, and I believe he said he's playing with the Grateful Groove at Wrigley Field Bar and Grill this Saturday, so that's going to be pretty sweet. So without any real further ado, enjoy this conversation I got to have with Mr. Phil Schurger.
Self-indulgent asking
That's
you to
okay.
let me be here again.
Dude, no worries.
I was thinking about it and I was like, oh man, am I being like turd?
No,
I just had a lot of fun last time. That was all.
Yeah, ditto. I mean, really, I want to, now that I'm past like the year point, I'm trying to be more chill with the project. Like I want to do it more often, but I feel like I don't know about hitting a stride, but after doing it for a period of time, it's like, okay, I know I can do it. So now it's like, how can I relax into it and like make it more of an easy thing in life? And so, I mean, having people who have been on the show already that can come back in and like revisit it. I think that's really neat. Like it kind of keeps the conversation going.
Yeah, like it's an extension of it. Yeah, for sure. Cool.
So welcome back, Phil.
All right,
Thanks for being on the show again.
You. Are we live?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
we're
okay.
recording. Yeah, yeah. This is in the spirit
Now I
of
know.
keeping it chill and relaxed.
Cool. hmm Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's Memorial Day. It's a
Yes.
classic American holiday, so I would normally be cleaning up a kitchen right now, but it's really nice. I'm like, the effortless thing, I that I was mentioning has been a big thing lately.
Hmm.
Like the idea that things can come about without having to put a bunch of force into it
hmm
um has been prominent. And so yeah, I'm glad that like we were able to just kind of flow with making this work today.
Yeah.
And it's all good, it all works out.
Yeah. And give me an example of what you mean by that,
Mm.
like circumstantially. I think I know. I
Mm-hmm.
probably do know what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, but I want to hear it from your
Yeah.
perspective.
uh I think it's well, I think it mainly is a big side effect of like our culture of like working culture, the idea that
hmm
like you have to put effort in to accomplish something, and that's the
Uh,
only way to get something done.
sure.
So I guess to try and be more uh actually give you an example, the whole like recording of the podcast thing,
hmm
like I could definitely be more of a go-getter and like
Ah,
sending messages to people to like get
sure.
guests on the show and like have a whole bunch lined up. Like I don't know who the next guest is going to be on the podcast. Like
Right.
this episode is going to come out tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like it came before I messaged you,
hmm
the worry came into my mind of, oh man, what if it doesn't happen today and I don't make the self-imposed deadline
Right,
that
right, right.
I only put on myself. No one else
No,
is putting that
totally.
on me.
Yeah,
And so it was a neat moment of seeing that thing of like, oh, I should be doing stuff to
sure.
be like, that is the definition of success, is like meeting deadlines and
Mm,
always being like consistently producing.
hmm
And I kind of let that go. I was like, well, if we have to do it tomorrow, we can do it tomorrow. I've got the time. And
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
nobody will probably even notice if I release a podcast episode a day late. Like, let's be
Sure.
real.
Yeah.
Like, all of that is manufactured in my own mind. Like, that worry was my own doing.
Right, right.
You didn't like do like that, was nothing from you.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
But like to have that idea of, okay, this can come about effortlessly, like then I just, when I saw that come up, I honestly, I looked at my phone, thought about, oh, should I message him? And I was like, whoa, I'm just gonna wait
hmm
a little bit and see how I feel in 5 minutes, instead of like texting him out of a frantic
Yeah.
thought that I need to get a podcast episode out today and my
Right.
guest isn't here, blah
Yeah.
blah blah, like making up a story.
Yeah.
I just like decided to wait for a minute. That all passed, and then I was able to much more calmly be like, "Hey, are we doing that today?" Without
Yeah.
knowing that if we did it tomorrow or next week, it would be
Oh,
fine,
sure. Yeah.
because that's like I
Yeah.
didn't want to have to force it to make like us sit down and have a fun conversation.
Yeah,
Like it
and for the
detracts from it, for me at least.
for sure, and for the listener context, so I forgot. Well, I didn't. I kind of forgot. Like I knew
Yeah.
this morning that I needed to be here, and then I went out to lunch with my son, and was doing this and that,
Nice.
and then my daughter was like, "Hey, come and pick me up," and that was the errand I was running.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, yeah. And so then and then Alejandro like sends me this message. I'm like, oh no, like I forgot. Like I knew, like I knew the thing. So it all worked out like
Uh-huh.
pretty well. So
Uh-huh.
thank you for your flexibility,
Yeah.
and I apologize for
Oh, it's all good.
causing you stress.
You caused me no stress. It was self-imposed. I manufactured that shit.
Right, right,
Like,
right.
and so that thing of like
And yet it
trying
still
to make it
happened.
effortless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think that being caught up in that thing of like wanting to get something done, of trying to force it, would have actually made it happen any smoother.
Yeah,
Like,
I
I
see what
would
you're
have.
saying.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Like
just unnecessary, right?
it's an attitude thing. We can be angry that things aren't happening the way we want, or we can kind of roll with it and then knowing that it will eventually get done and kind of
Hmm.
allow it to work out the way
Hmm.
it needs to. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be hippy dippy, just like going with the flow
Yeah.
kind of thing, allowing what arises to like enter and be a part of my experience, but
Hmm.
then equally allowing whatever that thing that arose to like leave my experience.
Hmm.
I think that is is a really important part of it. Maybe just like the letting whatever it is go in and out. Like in that moment, I like sat with my feelings. It was able to just go away. And then by having that desire to create an effortless conversation, it like allowed what wasn't serving me to leave my experience much more quickly than if I would have like not if I wanted to like force something to happen.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's just a drag,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
to try and make something happen. Like things happen on their own. Like things are going
Yes.
to arise.
Yeah.
That's a guarantee.
Yeah.
And so I find myself lately just wanting to put energy into the things that seem to continually to like naturally arise because
Yeah.
like it seems like when I allow stuff to just arise and I'm not trying to force things, there are patterns to what comes up in my life. And
Yes.
maybe it like has to do with preference and like personality and karma or whatever.
Right.
But like just being able to allow those things to come up and then also leave has been beneficial for me lately.
Hmm.
Does that make sense on the effortless thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you mind if I share a story of my own?
Go for it.
So the last, I'd say 7 years of my life have been very challenging, and I've really uprooted myself in a lot of ways. It's like I had a pretty solid identity from pretty early on of what I was trying to do with my life,
Mm-hmm,
and I
mm-hmm,
was very committed to the things that I wanted to do in life, and that would be, music,
mm-hmm,
obviously. And I've been a meditation practitioner since I was pretty young, to be honest. I mean,
mm-hmm,
in some respects, I've been curious about all of that my whole life. Like, it wasn't like
mm-hmm,
something I came to later. Like, even as a child, I was interested in that kind of thing.
mm-hmm.
And and I recognized pretty early on, like even as a teenager, that I would notice patterns occurring in my life and patterns and occurring in other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I never got really into astrology, but like I like people will, my way of doing things is that people will say things to me, and I won't assume they're true or false. I'll just observe what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
Mm-hmm.
observe a thing over time, you start to see the cycles in the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
whether something's true or false doesn't necessarily matter, but cycles do occur, and you can see
Mm-hmm.
kind of patterns arising. And so in my not ever studying Hinduism 17-year-old way, I was like, oh, that's what karma is. It's patterns that
Mm-hmm.
move. And then you can understand these patterns. And then you can play into those patterns and let them consume you, or you can take the path of the adept, which is to let let the pattern pass through you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's something. I remember reading this book. I think it was by Robert Wang, and the book's called Kabbalistic Tarot,
Okay.
and he was just talking about like meditation and symbolism and things like that, and he gave this analogy that he was talking about the difference between understanding symbols and patterns and not understanding them is the difference
Mm.
between walking into traffic and observing it versus walking in traffic with your back to it. So it's like,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so like it doesn't mean you're going to stop anything one way or another. But if you
Mm-hmm.
turn and you face the traffic, you can see the
Mm-hmm.
traffic as it's coming at
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
So you can see the
yeah.
patterns as they're coming at you. And then you have choice to potentially move out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Versus if you're unconscious, this is like being conscious of the pattern versus being unconscious of the pattern.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so if you're unconscious of the pattern, then you're constantly getting run over by the Mack truck, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
understand that is because you're standing in the lane. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? You're
yeah,
like
yeah.
literally standing in the middle of
Uh-huh.
the street,
Uh-huh.
and then the truck just
Uh-huh.
ran you over. Well,
Yeah.
why did the truck run you over? Is it because you were
Yeah.
standing there? And
Yeah.
and the funny thing about that, and this is this like impartial, impersonal nature of experience, so to speak, is it's not personal necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You were just in the path of somebody else's karma, or you were in the
Mm-hmm.
path of something. And sometimes people are, the question is the notion of mine, versus mine versus thine, like my karma
Mm-hmm.
versus yours, and karmic participation. And people get into all these, these. I'm not going to say they're just ideas, but
Mm-hmm.
there's an aspect of that of like how many times does your will get pulled along the lines of somebody else's? And so, right, so if you understand that concept of karmic participation, or have
I
heard of
don't
that
know if I
before.
do know what that
So,
means.
and I don't even know that I know what it means, but my general
Yeah.
understanding of it is that sometimes when you become involved with somebody, like
Mm-hmm.
the overall pattern of their life influences you because maybe they're stronger willed than you are,
Mm-hmm.
and then that strength of will is like, again, it's like that, it's like a wave, or it's like the truck kind of
Mm-hmm.
running
Mm-hmm.
over you, and then you're pulled into the experience of other people,
Okay.
or you're pulled into another set of experiences.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that can be for
Okay.
good or bad. That doesn't,
Yeah.
karma always doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Like there's positive and negative, and we can look at it that way, or we can take a non-dual approach, and none of these things are either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we can kind of get into that a little bit later. But as for does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I think so.
there's, so say that you're, I don't know, we could probably make it really, like let's just make it something really simple, like when you're in middle school or something, and like a bunch of kids are making fun of another kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was spurned by somebody, because there's always somebody in the group who has a stronger will than everybody
Mm-hmm.
else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
in order to, like, because you don't want to be the kid made, or the various factors that are going on in the whole thing, you don't want to be the one being made fun of, or you
Mm-hmm.
don't actually take a stand, you just participate in the thing that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's this unconscious flow coming through somebody, and the strength of that unconscious mechanism pulls you along with it.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
begin to
Yeah.
act in a similar manner. You're participating
Mm-hmm.
in something
Mm-hmm.
that, is that you? That's
Mm-hmm.
the question you
Mm-hmm.
have to ask yourself. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
any of us can think of the moments where we acted in a way that, no, it's not who we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we did the action anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
there was something about what was there in the air, or whatever was going on, where, who knows, there's any variety of
Uh-huh.
circumstances that
Uh-huh.
can, and you chose to act in a way that wasn't, that in under other circumstances you wouldn't act.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
participated in something.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
get what
so,
you're saying.
and I think there's a level of this when, people get into relationships with people, whether, like, particularly romantic relationships, because there's more on the line there. But friendships are like this
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm.
We all know we have good friends who are, and again, I not necessarily to break this down to good or bad, because we can put those labels on there.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
bad experiences equal. I mean, some of my most defining experiences in my life were bad experiences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
I've had some experiences that I realized through those experiences, I am not this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not a participant. I don't want to participate in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? And through being pulled along in somebody else's experience, that showed me something in myself. You have moments of where you can choose what it is that you want to be or
Mm-hmm.
don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be,
Mm-hmm.
what you will or you won't say yes to,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where it seems that on an individual level we have the most like power of like, okay, I am going to participate in this or I'm not. It's like how you respond
Yes.
or like react or don't react and choose to respond to a situation.
Yeah.
Like I heard a story about, I think it was like an Indian saint, and when people would start talking bad in any capacity, she would just get up and leave the room. It's like, nope,
Mm.
not participating, not even
Yep.
gonna listen. And like
Yeah.
that's how hardcore she was about like what she would take in. She
Yeah.
just like wouldn't even, is like no.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think there is like that is the hardline version of it, but I think that idea of, yeah, I when you show up to a situation, there's like that. But then also recognizing, because it is so easy to just get pulled into stuff like
Yes.
being a human in a human body and like having this hardware to work with, like that, like it's almost a mob mentality. Like that's how large groups of people end up following like a charismatic person.
Absolutely,
Like,
absolutely.
and yeah, it
Yeah.
could be positive or negative, you know. It's so it is just kind of that thing that is, but there's the aspect of like finding one's like personal power and sovereignty to be around and in that situation and be like, okay, this isn't in alignment with what I'm going to do. It's not that what you guys are doing is good or bad,
Yes.
but it's just like not for me.
It's not for me.
So
Yeah.
I'm maybe just going to remove myself from the gymnasium where everybody's doing the loud chanting for the sports team because I don't like sports. Like, it could
Yeah.
be like
Yeah.
that, you know? It doesn't need
Yeah.
to be like some terrible thing. It could just be like, I don't like sports. And so I'm going to go to the theater department, which
Yeah.
is kind of what I did.
Yeah, exactly. And it's an interesting thing to watch group dynamics over time because in my opinion, individual power is obviously important, but radical change, and I don't mean that in like full anarchy or something like that, but like maybe I can use a different word, like significant change only happens through collectives. Individuals can change. I can have significant change of my choices, but what effect does that have on a broader population? Like not much. It has an effect on how I interact with the people that I know and the circle that's, with me. If I choose to act a certain way, then that impacts my immediate environment, but it's not necessarily impacting a larger scaffolding, so to speak.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like it's not until you have whole collectives moving in a similar direction that any profound change is able to occur. And I think if you look at history, that's pretty obvious to see. Like for me, I look at like ideologies as almost being like these like I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right word to say. Like I'll call them entities. It's like you get it's,
Mm-hmm,
but that
mm-hmm.
sounds too ominous. But like you think about it, like you get hijacked by a thought,
Uh-huh,
right?
uh-huh.
Because a lot of people have charged a thought,
Mm-hmm,
and then you
mm-hmm,
get
mm-hmm.
hijacked by that thought, and then all of a sudden you're following the madman.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But like, is it you following the madman, or is it that it's the ideology? It's you
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
agreeing with a certain kind of ideology that has allowed that to open up.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And again, like if you're thinking about power and control and direction happens through ideology and the directing of ideology towards an end.
Mm-hmm,
And it's
mm-hmm.
it's something that I've thought about for a very long time, and I think it's easy to observe. Man, it's like social media is.
Oh yeah,
I
it's
don't
just
even
like the
know.
magnifying glass.
It's
It's
a
a petri dish
magnifying
for
glass
that,
of it. Yeah,
for
yeah,
like
yeah,
mass
exactly.
movements and
Mass
stuff.
movements and
Yeah,
quick, and it's amazing.
yeah.
It almost shows how insignificant all of it is because you can shift through all of it at such a
Mm-hmm,
fast rate.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Trends don't last. You
Uh
know what
huh.
I
Uh
mean?
huh.
Like, and maybe we can learn something from that idea. Is like, okay, so if these trends have such a limited force to them, but that doesn't
Mm-hmm,
mean they're not
mm-hmm,
impactful in those moments.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then what does that say of the nature of thought for us across the board?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I think that's where I wanted to go with this is that you know I went through a lot of hardship around 2017. I considered
Uh-huh.
quitting music completely.
Oh shit.
Yeah, like just
Damn.
moving on, like not
Ooh.
being a musician anymore. Because I was judging myself in a certain way and
Ah,
just
okay.
looking at my life, and the question came about, what if I wasn't this, and
Mm-hmm.
and even before that, I've thought about this is that like teaching always came easy for me. Like I never
Mm-hmm.
had to work very hard to get teaching jobs. Like it was like always in
Mm-hmm.
alignment
Mm-hmm.
for me. It was effortless as
Oh,
as
okay,
we
cool.
started off
Yeah.
the conversation with. It's like there was always like and I'm grateful for that. There was always this network for me in place where finding teaching work and establishing myself in that way
Mm-hmm.
was I still had to do the work, but it like
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason I always got a lot of opportunities doing that very readily.
Mm, cool.
Versus the kind of like gigging opportunities or performance as a performer, like the kind of opportunities I wanted I never saw them coming to fruition, or there was always
Mm-hmm.
some kind of block there for
Uh-huh.
me,
Uh-huh.
you know? And so I got into this thing around 2017 of after, just years of frustration with myself and not feeling like I was getting anywhere, of being like, fine, I'm going to let it go completely. And if I get gigs, then, like I was basically me saying to myself on a soul level, like, if I'm meant to be doing this, then show me.
Uh-huh.
Otherwise,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to assume I'm only meant to be a teacher and that's it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because like the ability of getting the kind of work I wanted was always limited. And just as I think I started thinking about more of life like that as well, of like, well, what if I just went towards everything that was effortless and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't try to force or initiate or like any of these things. I just lived in that headspace, and
Mm-hmm.
instead of having this kind of internal frustration and aggravation and these kinds of things
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not getting the opportunities I want. What if I just
Mm-hmm.
release it completely, and then just see what happens? And
Uh-huh.
that's been an interesting, um, an interesting journey, so to speak, over the last several years of observing that. Of like, what if I just let it all go? What if I don't do this? Maybe I was never meant to be a performer. Like clearly I'm not getting, like there's some kind of block there
Mm-hmm.
in some
Mm-hmm.
way.
What do you think the block was? Like, have you reflected on that?
I think it's a combination of things, because like the question first off
And is it
is
real?
is it
Like,
real? Is it your
as
perception?
well.
And was I even blocked to begin with? Because it's
Yeah.
like I was
Yeah.
performing, but I think it's one's idea of success,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and what your idea of success is may not be in alignment with your environment or the possibilities available to you in your locale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's something like I've over the last couple of years I've realized like my idea of success as a musician, like as a performer, is playing 4 to 5 nights a week. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing less than that is success.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the point. That, like, I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's funny
Yeah.
being a musician. It's like, I don't want to
Uh-huh.
say it's self-important, but it's like I'm saying, oh, I want to play 5 nights a week. Well, like, how many people check into the office 5 days a week?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So that's like I'm not asking for something unrealistic on certain terms,
Yeah. Yeah.
because like, you know, everybody works
Mm-hmm.
a job
Mm-hmm.
that's whatever,
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
5 days.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
shouldn't say everybody, but most people, a large portion of the population work
Uh-huh.
Monday through Friday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Uh-huh.
And so as a performer, if you're asking to, somebody says, well, I want to be gigging 4 to 5 nights a week and that's success. And people are like, you're out of your mind. You're playing 200 dates a year or like whatever that equates to. That
Mm-hmm.
sounds
Mm-hmm.
like a lot. But
Mm-hmm.
like somebody who works at Sweetwater checks in
Is
for that many
doing
hours.
that many.
Somebody who
Yeah.
works at,
Uh-huh.
whatever the grocery store, like that's
Uh-huh.
how many
Uh-huh.
hours a week, well, not hours,
Yeah.
but like days a week that they work,
Uh-huh.
you
Uh-huh.
know?
Uh-huh.
But because of the nature of the performance industry,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and depending on your area, like so
Mm-hmm.
for instance, like in my opinion, Fort Wayne doesn't have the same kind of gigging economy maybe a larger city has, where
Mm-hmm.
you can solely be a performing musician, right? And that's like,
Mm-hmm.
there aren't enough venues to keep a class of working
Mm-hmm.
musicians
Mm-hmm.
in that way going, like really going,
Yeah. Yeah. I
where
agree.
there's enough of that kind of work. So that's one like aspect of it I realized is like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, look really clearly, like, is this that it's not in alignment in me, or is it that the market that I live in doesn't bear those results or
Mm-hmm.
very rarely bears those
Mm-hmm.
results,
Mm-hmm.
which is more the case,
Uh-huh.
because it's
Uh-huh.
hard to just make a living here just as a performer. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's not hard in other places, but there are some places where that is a possibility
Mm-hmm.
and that is
Mm-hmm.
easier to obtain. Like say, I mean, just if you look at it on the numbers, do you know how many million people Indy has?
I think it's like 2
2 million.
million
Yeah,
or
which is
so.
at
Maybe
least double the size of
1.5.
us, right? Or
Yeah.
is maybe
Yeah.
three
I
times
think
bigger than
it's
us?
yeah, I think it's about 3 times, maybe 3.5 times the size of Fort Wayne.
So that might not seem like much, but when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
gigging opportunities, when it comes to the kind of opportunities, when it comes to the like,
Yeah.
like in a larger city, you have corporate gigs available, right? And so you can do like the private corporate gigs as well as the wedding thing. Not that there aren't wedding gigs here, but there's specified kinds of bands. And then you have more clubs available and people going to those clubs, and there's, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. There's
there's,
kind of like a broader,
yes,
wider set of
right.
places and
Yeah.
opportunities. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And so the question then becomes like you the person are giving yourself a very hard time, but the external isn't in alignment with the internal.
Yeah.
The internal desire is not well placed. And so then the internal has to realize like whether it'll accept those things or not doesn't matter. That's another question. But the reality is that here's, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So on a broader scope, getting out of music, it's like, and going back to the looking at the traffic thing versus running, versus going the opposite direction. You right, the earlier analogy of being hit by the truck over and over again.
Yeah. So do you feel like you were being hit by the truck?
I was being hit by the truck because I wasn't facing the right direction, and seeing like what needed to happen or how things could happen, and it was more just like I'm not, like I'm looking 200 miles away and being hit by the truck rather than looking where I'm at and like
when there's a truck coming up.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like spaced out and dreaming and the truck keeps running me over, Yeah, so that's
a rough place to be.
It is a rough place to be, and unconsciously, and I think that's like, again, like as a kind of metaphor, I think that's where a lot of us exist, is that we don't realize that it's really not the truck's fault, and it's not even our fault. Like the fault, we can kind of put fault aside and look at the circumstance. Then if we can look at the circumstance, maybe we can, one, get out of the way of the truck, and then maybe we can even hitchhike and say, hey man, can you give me a ride? Because I think I got to go somewhere else.
I might get you at least halfway there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. Yeah. And so, I mean, now 7 years later, you are still playing, so you didn't quit.
Yeah. No, totally.
You didn't give it up.
Yeah.
So how did you get from there to here then?
I think, I mean, internally.
And how does it feel different now?
Oh man, it feels different in a lot of different ways. That's a funny sentence, but I think it's a long internal process of, I want to be careful how I say this, because it's like, I think it's important to go into your grief, right? And because you can understand, I don't know, I go back and forth on this. Like sometimes I see people go into their grief and they just stay there, and then they just decide that they like being broken,
Yeah.
or broken's maybe the wrong term, but maybe they like being hit by the truck.
Well, I feel like, well, it gives, if it's a truck hitting you, it gives a real easy out. It's like, I just got run over by a truck.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's easy to, like, I mean, when I've been in that spot, it's easy to like not take responsibility for myself, because I just got hit by a truck. And like, even though like the truck is long gone, like the scene has been cleaned up, like you're fine. Like, but I still like held on to that thing. I call it like, it's like a coat. It's like a coat made of eyelashes or something. Like when you're telling yourself it's real cold outside, and so you need this uncomfortable itchy coat, but you really don't. I think that's what that situation is like. And I know what you're talking about. Like grabbing onto grief and just staying in it. But it's not good.
No, it's not. And I don't personally want, like, I don't want to be in grief, I'm not an angry guy. I'm not, I don't, and I'm not going in. And my way of doing things is typically like, even if I'm wrong, I just take responsibility for it. I'm just like, well, whatever, it must be me, and like, if I'm in a situation where nobody's taking responsibility, I'll tend to be like, okay, fine, I'm the one who screwed this up. I'm the one who did it all. Whether it's true or not does not matter. Like, cause it's like, in my mind, somebody just needs to take responsibility for the matter and adjust it. Because like ultimately, isn't that what we're trying to do? Is to get to a situation where things feel more congruent, and then they can be more effortless, right? Like things can move, but at the same time, when it involves multiple people, that congruence can be difficult. So then it's, if you're the one who's just like, I think my solution for that in life has been, fine, I'm just going to pick up the ball and I'll take responsibility for this, whether it was mine or not. It doesn't matter. Like this is a train wreck. We got to pick the train up, put it back on the tracks, and move down the line.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like well, I how how old were you in 2015, 16? Somewhere in there.
About 20, early
About 20.
20s.
Were
Yeah.
you
I
into
was born in
meditation at that
94.
time?
Um, I like not a lot. No, I really started getting into, and I really started like practicing yoga
Mm-hmm.
first. Well, no, I guess I got into a meditation group, I think around 2016, maybe
Okay.
as early as 2015, but like that I was pretty early into it.
Yeah.
Like didn't have much of an understanding of what the whole thing was
Sure.
about.
So I remember, the only reason I bring it up is that I feel like, you know, in like certain circles like to use catchwords. And again, and I mean no disrespect saying this. I'm going to just like say that catchwords can be useful in certain ways, but catchwords can also become ideologies.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything. Like it can fixate your attention in a certain way and
Mm-hmm.
fixate a direction for a collective of people. And so I just remember, that was the period of like shadow work, shadow work, shadow work,
Oh
light worker,
yeah.
like there's,
Yeah.
and I never quite understood that, because to me, coming from a background in Hermetic Kabbalah or Jewish Kabbalah, or like, the kind of Kriya practices that I'd had, and even Dzogchen, I don't even see those things as separate worlds
Mm-hmm.
of like shadow work versus
Mm-hmm.
light work or something like that. Like
Yeah.
if you're to me, if you're doing any real authentic practice, you don't have a choice about those matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's going to bring up the stuff,
Uh-huh.
but the
Uh-huh.
point isn't just to bring it up. Like I had a teacher, this woman Shantara, who I have deep respect for, and you know she would talk about when people would have very like, you know there there are times when the energy gets really charged in somebody, and then that energy just disperses, and a lot of times you'll have like you'll literally have, they'll start crying, or just, it's just, you have a
Mm-hmm.
very large release of energy out of your
Uh-huh.
body.
Uh-huh.
And those are like karmic releases. They're
Mm-hmm.
kind of, you can see them that way, or they're emotional releases, or what have you. And I remember her saying, because some people would get very attached to that experience,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she said one time, she was like, that's not a deeper level spiritual experience. That's a beginning experience. It's a necessary
Mm-hmm.
one. But like, you're just dealing with just clearing out. That's like taking a shower and getting some dirt off your hands.
Yeah.
You're not even dealing with
Yeah.
expansion yet. You're
Mm-hmm.
just preparing the way, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so
Well, I
my
think that's what like shadow work might be
well, and I understand that. I
in a
understand that.
way.
Yes, and the idea is that, but I felt like the way that got portrayed by people, and this is, like, I also have to understand that a lot of people, profited very deeply off the idea of shadow work.
Yeah, I'm sure a
Am
lot
I
of
allowed to
books.
say that? Is that
Oh,
shadow
I'm
work?
sure a lot of books were sold with shadow work in the
A
subtitle.
lot of, courses were taught,
Yeah. Oh yeah, still being sold. I get advertisements for it from a couple
Capitalist,
podcasts I listen
spiritual,
to.
stuff,
It is really
you
funny.
know.
But I think
Yeah.
it like came from Jungian stuff,
Oh,
like
is that what
Carl
that came
Jung,
from?
because yeah, I think he was really the one
Oh,
that
interesting.
talked about like that integrating of like the shadow, like the darker side of consciousness. And it's interesting because like
Huh.
it I feel like in around that like 2015 time, the like woo woo community got like the spiritual hippy dippy spiritual
I
community
don't even
got
know
a
what that
hold.
is.
Woo woo, it's just like kind of a slang term
Oh, it's
for
a slang term. Okay.
any like for people who like crystals and like
Okay.
ground, like, you know, gotta go put your bare feet on the earth, all stuff that I do. I'm just saying I'm pretty
No,
woo
no,
woo
I get it.
myself,
Yeah, yeah.
but like it's kind of layman's
Sure.
spirituality that so I think that a lot of people who were like waking up to the spiritual side of our
Mm-hmm.
world in the West, who grew up with like Western concepts, but then
Well,
were starting.
can I interject there real
Yeah.
quick? Jungian psychology and Jung's is Western concepts. So, but
Yeah,
just keep
yeah,
going, and I will get back to that.
yeah, because he was very influenced. Yeah, so yeah,
No,
so he's
not even.
Western.
It was
He
Western.
is Western. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so like the Western ideas are kind of we're starting to get mixed in with like Eastern stuff.
Okay.
So I feel, because in my study of Eastern psychology and like philosophies, there isn't talk of like shadow work or like integrating that.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is all very, very Western
Yeah.
from like what I have
Interesting.
seen. But there is a movement that I think did start around like 2015,
Yeah.
maybe around like 2012 it kicked
Yeah.
off,
Like, and then it kind
where
of,
like
yeah.
the two worlds have been smashing together, and so like things are being pulled from like Jungian practice and like from the work of like Stanislav Grof, and then that's being combined with like like meditation, and maybe like I don't know if
Interesting.
transcendental meditation is specifically Eastern, or if that one is like a specific.
Isn't
Transcendental
that's
meditation is like a
Maharishi, right?
specific line of practice.
Yeah.
I'm not sure though. That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is I don't really know. But
Yeah.
I do, yeah, that like 2012
um,
to 2015 time, I feel like a lot of people who were waking up to spirituality were grasping at a lot of different things
mm,
through the internet. And so a lot of stuff got layered over each
yeah.
other without an actual understanding
Of
of what
context.
it really was. And
Interesting.
so people got into meditation to do shadow work when
Uh,
like really that's not what meditation is for. Like you
right.
got to take a shower before you like are going to go and sit down and
Exactly.
meditate. Like they're preliminary practices
Yeah. Yeah.
before you're actually going to sit
Huh.
down on the mat and get something done, besides just like watching the monkey mind
Yes.
spin on a wheel.
Exactly.
Like I
Exactly.
spent plenty of time doing
No.
that. Like,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. So I just wanted to put that out there because I do, even to this day, hear a lot about shadow work
Okay.
and think there is some value to it,
Yeah.
but I feel like it is not a part of Eastern philosophy. Like Eastern philosophy
And
views what Western philosophy is viewing as the shadow as something different. Like I
interesting.
feel like they're looking at the same thing, but the interpretation I feel is
Totally
very
different.
different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to say two things. Well, I'll start there. And so it's interesting. So I was a practitioner of something called Dzogchen, which is like a
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Tibetan practice. And
Okay.
so my teacher had studied with Namkai Norbu, who Namkai Norbu was like the lineage holder of Dzogchen. And he
Okay.
died,
Cool.
I think, in 20, somewhere between 2018 and 2020, somewhere in that
Okay.
window. But, like, and that was, a long, long term lineage.
Mm-hmm.
And my teacher had lived in his ashram and actually taught in his ashram, in the 90s. And then I
Mm.
met him at a later time through some friends of mine and had been studying Dzogchen. And at that time, that, like, people are on this kind of shadow work train of diving down in the mud,
Uh huh.
and
Uh
doing
huh.
that. And, like, as a result of me, my own choices, maybe my own karmic participation, so to speak. I just remember in that period that I was like, I didn't agree with that way of practice because to me it didn't
Mm-hmm.
seem in line with what I'd learned previously,
Mm-hmm.
even
Mm-hmm.
Western practice, which I'll come back to that. But he specifically said to me, and he'd never said anything like this before, and we were doing a session and like, online, and he's like, and he looked at me and we hadn't talked in a couple months and he was like, what are you doing in your practice, and I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, and he's French, and he's like, feel, you have this all wrong. Like, this is no, like, this is your, he's like, you're going into the garbage and just sitting there,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah.
hadn't even told him about any of this. Like, he could
Oh.
see it in me,
Uh-huh.
and he's like, that's no, that's like not,
Mm.
don't do that. That's not the way to practice,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But I was just, I don't know, for whatever reason, I chose to sit in that for a
Mm-hmm.
while,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it taught me something sitting down there. But like, you know, I I don't know. It I think it more confirmed things I'd already understood. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because consciousness is a choice in many respects, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's, I don't know, a privileged thing to say, but I think, I don't know, maybe it's a choice, maybe it's not. I'll just go along with what I'm saying. I have a
Yeah.
choice how I act with you right
Yeah.
now. I have a choice how I interact with anyone. And that's what this effortlessness
Mm-hmm.
is. This is kind of that, it's a choice, right? Like, I can choose to be very angry all the time and to live through that, and that's valid. And I think that's some of what people in some of these movements want, is just the validity to be an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
A valid, like, it's fine. Nobody's, I mean, like, I was, I had this thing the other day where I think, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed a lot more meth addicts around recently.
I've
Like,
been noticing people are kind of in a rougher state and
and
they're coming out and about.
and
Yeah.
and I don't like, I have a very close friend who is homeless and is an addict and these
Mm.
things. So I don't mean this in any negative way or like any blind
Uh-huh.
way, but there's like a part of that chaos that I've always enjoyed in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be that, but like that someone
Yeah.
can express it like that way. And
Yeah.
so me
Yeah.
and my daughter were driving down Berry Street a couple weeks ago, and this dude was blitzed out of his mind on meth, and he was yelling, screaming. He's riding his bike, and he's like, "Get out of the way!" And he
Oh
just kept yelling. There's
no.
nobody in front of him.
Oh no.
There's nobody in front of him. He's just yelling, like,
Yeah.
yelling,
Dang.
get out of the way, and he just kept yelling, get out of the way. And I've seen a couple instances like this. Actually, we had this guy one time who was like, he'd gotten some kind of like 3 foot long metal piece off of the ground, like it might have fallen off of a car. This was like at Washington Boulevard, kind of over by, like, I don't know, Hannah, and because I
Uh-huh.
kind of turn there a lot, Hannah and Washington, somewhere in there, to
Uh-huh.
get on to
Uh-huh.
Washington to go out Southwest or whatever, to go to Trader Joe's. And this dude's eyes were giant,
Oh
and he was
jeez.
just like running out into Washington trying to hit cars with this 3 foot,
Oh my
like,
god.
moving, like, you know how fast people move on Washington,
Yeah,
right?
it's not a
He's
slow
running,
road.
I mean, he's running out into the street and trying to
Oh
hit them,
no.
you know. And so, like, I pull up, I'm coming up Hannah to turn right onto Washington, and I see him, and I'm like, this dude's gonna, like, run at me, like, and I could just see it, like, I knew it,
Uh-huh.
like,
Uh-huh.
right. And so he's walking, and he starts running at me, and he's waving the wand, so I kind of erratically, like, move my car, and then he gets a little nervous that somebody actually, like, did something.
They
you
met
know
his energy.
and yeah, exactly. And then I, like, turn, and I'm like out of there, And then later, I called the police, and I was just like, look, I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble here, but, like, for this person's own
Yeah.
safety, like, they're like,
Yeah.
literally, like, you know,
He's running out in the
he's
street.
running into the street
Yeah.
dangerously, trying to hit. It's like he's playing a video game or something.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But the thing I was thinking about it is that, like, you get to see the human mind so clearly exposed in those
Uh-huh.
situations.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and you learn a lot about the mind, like, of normal people, through
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
seeing the mind being put in very excess, because,
Uh-huh.
like, in
Uh-huh.
that state of mind, like the guy driving on the bike screaming, get out of my way, what's the emotional impulse behind that? If you really break it
Uh-huh.
down, if you don't just look at this person as, like, oh my gosh, this is, whatever you want to say about it,
Uh-huh.
driving down the street, blitzed out of his mind, what's the emotional impulse that's driving that? And that, to me, is more honest than most of us are able to be, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, why? Because how many of us are brave enough to really actually
And commit to that.
commit to, like,
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
being that in public,
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
let alone in private. Like, a lot of people won't engage that in private.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
on the one side, it's like that maybe that kind of shadow work, if you want to call it that, you know, is useful
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of ways. But does it get moved forward is the question, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or do you
Mm-hmm.
just sit in
Mm-hmm.
it? And that's something, because it's, if I wasn't going to be a musician, I would have been a psychologist, and I probably would
Mm-hmm.
have been a very good psychologist with addiction, because like I have a level of patience that I'm going to guess a lot of people don't. And if you know me
Mm-hmm.
very well, you'll
Mm-hmm.
know what I'm talking about. And I have the ability to sit with people slandering me indefinitely because it's not personal to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can call me whatever you want, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes
Mm-hmm.
those things get to me, but like it just depends on the context. For the most
Uh-huh.
part, again, if it's just that mind amplified and vomiting, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like, can you really be mad at that person?
Yeah.
You know, like really, truly,
Uh-huh.
if you have compassion in your being. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go live with them
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or any of those kinds of things. You're trying to, you know, if you're trying to help, I'll put that in quotation
Mm-hmm.
marks,
Mm-hmm.
what is it you're offering as help? The
Uh-huh.
ability for them to voice all of that. Are you, you know, what is it we're actually doing
Mm-hmm.
here? You know,
Yeah.
um,
And those people, it's really interesting. Those people, I shouldn't other people who are
right.
experiencing rough life situations, but like I ran into a fella digging through a dumpster
Mm-hmm.
outside of like the rock climbing gym in town. And I thought he was like working on the place. They were still doing construction and stuff. So I like didn't even
Yeah.
think of it when I came up and like struck up a conversation with him and like through conversation figured out that he's like living on the street.
Yeah.
And like really, it was one of the most honest and like genuine conversations I'd
Mm-hmm.
had with a person
Yes.
in a long time.
Yeah.
Like, cause I mean, for me, I tr- tried to avoid like having like judgments on him. Like, I mean, I just thought he was some like laborer
Right. Right.
in the dumpster, like lost something at
Yeah.
the job site or something and
Yep.
needed to find it. That was my initial assumption when I struck up conversation with him. And like it was really neat how he was just totally real back with me, and we were
Yeah.
just two dudes having a conversation over a dumpster in a parking lot about life. And it was like and to kind of bring it back to like shadow work, I think that people who are experiencing like psychotic breaks like that,
Mm-hmm.
or just like having trouble with addiction and like that aspect of the human mind is being
Yes.
exposed through them, like that has the opportunity for like the person on the other side to work through their own shadow or like attachments or hangups.
Mm-hmm.
Because like what if I would have had some like fear or judgment about that person and whatever the situation is, or like that I encounter that dude
No,
on the
for sure.
bike and think like, oh, how could he be doing that, yelling and being angry in the street? That's a nuisance, we need to call the cops. Like that's like, I mean, it's being a Karen. We have a name for that.
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
am I being a Karen in this situation?
Or
Like, does that make me feel more like open hearted, or am I like feeling shut down because of my response to this person who like is probably experiencing like some suffering? Like it
yeah.
sounds like a fearful situation, like he
Yeah.
thinks something is coming head on at
Yeah.
him. That's a scary situation.
Yeah.
Talk about being hit by a truck.
Yeah.
Like imagine if you
Exactly.
are facing the truck and it's coming right at you. How scary
But
was
the
it? I'd
truck's
be like,
not
get
there.
out of
But
my
then
way.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like they're exposing something through themselves that also can shine a light on something in like our own mind,
Yeah.
like just by perceiving that person existing in that state. You know, like what is my response, and like what is the initial reaction that
Mm-hmm.
comes up in me? Is it like, oh, to other that person,
Right.
or to like include them in my experience and like my karma and like
Mm-hmm.
my own mind? You know,
Yeah.
am I just gonna shut that person out? Am I not gonna ask the dude digging through the dumpster what he's doing,
Right.
what he's up to, if he knows anything about the rock climbing gym?
Yeah.
Or am I just gonna put my blinders on and like keep riding my bike? Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like
Yeah.
that would have been a valid decision to make in that situation, but I would have lost out on a good conversation with a fella
Mm-hmm.
and like an interesting connection that like taught me about myself and
Yeah.
about him and about like the city we live in,
Yeah.
which was all very good. And so yeah, I think whenever I'm able to like get my blinders off and like kind of bringing it back around to like being open to an effortless experience of life, like
Mm-hmm.
that conversation with the dude over the dumpster, it was an effortless conversation. Like he didn't ask me for money or anything. I ended up giving him $5
Yeah.
because like I wanted to. He gave me good conversation. He might have, I don't know, he might have bought booze with it, but who cares? Like
Well,
that's
and on that matter,
his decision.
the kind of judgments we have about not we, but just generally people seem to have about
Mm-hmm.
homelessness and poverty. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, you know, how we view addiction in society. And there's a big difference between somebody who has similar addictions and comes from a family that has money and the means to help that person,
Mm-hmm.
and a person who perhaps doesn't have a family unit. I mean, think about how many people that are incredibly, well off or upper middle class or whatever, who are horrible alcoholics or horrible
Mm-hmm.
drug
Mm-hmm.
users in some way. I
Yeah.
remember like a long time ago when I was living in San Diego, I knew somebody who was from La Jolla, which is a very wealthy neighborhood, and he'd become a doctor, and he was a functioning heroin addict as a doctor. So
Dang.
it's like, yeah, exactly. So we
That's
have
crazy.
ideas about what it means to be a heroin addict, but it's like literally,
Mm-hmm.
so this person who's your doctor, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, are you going
Yeah.
to look at them and call them a junkie?
Uh-huh.
But the reality is, if you want to use that word with harshness, that person is that. But
Uh-huh.
you have
Uh-huh.
why do you have more humanity towards this person?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Right? Why? If you get really honest about the reason for the humanity, one, is it better hidden?
Yeah.
It's just because you
Yeah.
don't have to look at it? Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Is
Mm-hmm.
it because, and I've been thinking this a lot. It's like, when it comes to addiction, it's almost as if no one cares what you do so long as you show up functionally in society,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the guy riding down the street on the bike, in a traditional sense of what that means,
Uh-huh.
probably to most people isn't showing up traditionally,
Uh-huh.
but would you look at him differently if he was a businessman? Because I mean, think about it. Like, I just watched The Wolf of Wall Street the other
Oh
day.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, same exact way of showing up in the world.
Same.
Screaming, angry, like
And because he's a millionaire, a
yeah.
multimillionaire, it's okay.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Like, I
Playing
mean,
with
look at that.
imaginary
Like,
stocks.
look
Like
at
that stuff's
that.
not real.
And scamming people harder than
Yeah.
scamming. I mean, harder than this
Yeah.
guy ever will.
Yeah.
Like the guy
Yeah.
on the bike, the guy. Like that's
Yeah,
it's a
that's an
funny.
interesting perspective
Like,
on it.
yeah, yeah. Our ideas and the way we look at people in our and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's man, it's a wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
interesting. The
It's
Wolf of Wall
Yeah,
Street.
and I'd watched that movie when it came out, and
Uh-huh.
I didn't know what it came up, and I was just like, oh man, that film was brilliant, and I was hoping it still
Uh-huh.
held up. It still held up. It's
Okay, I
still a
remember watching
brilliant
it.
film. Yeah,
It was pretty good. Yeah.
the acting is
Yeah.
amazing.
Uh-huh.
Just
Uh-huh.
so, and the script, just everything about it
Uh-huh.
is
Uh-huh.
so, wow,
Yeah,
what a story.
that's such a weird like view into the world. Like so to to kind of bring it back a little bit,
Yeah,
I and to like music and that kind of stuff
yeah.
and like what it is to be an artist
Oof.
and like a musician, like the so I was as the world changes, I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about like how the scene in the world in general and like our society and culture is changing and how it's like becoming fairly clear that the mass media is just produced and like spoon fed to us and it's
I
not
think
like
so.
actually a legit thing. um and that like going out to California to like get discovered is not like the way to actually be an artist. Oh my god, I have like crumbs on me from the cereal I was chowing down beforehand.
I'm
That's
not
gross.
judging.
Thank you for that. I wondered where that went. But like, what it means to be an artist now, and like what that looks like, and where one needs to be like I'm interested in like hashing into that conversation because I feel like that's
Hmm.
probably a big part
Absolutely.
of what you
Yeah.
have been reflecting on in these last 7 years, and like
Yeah. Yeah.
what it is to like be a successful artist, like to, is it
Yeah.
playing 4 or 5 days a week, like,
Right.
and if it is, fantastic. If it's, or is it something different, like, and it's different for every person,
Hmm.
I'm sure. But like I think that idea that has been put forward about what it looks like
Yes.
to
Yeah.
be a successful
Yes.
artist,
Yeah.
musician, actor,
Yeah.
whatever, writer, like that is getting holes poked through it pretty regularly
Absolutely.
and like with increasing
Yeah.
regularity. And like, I mean, in my own experience of putting more energy into like the music projects I'm working on, into the podcast, I'm like now a year into it, feeling that different experience of like, okay, my idea of what it would be like and look like and feel like to be running a successful podcast
Hmm.
at the start versus like my idea of that now,
Yeah.
pretty different. Like there are similarities, but there's also like differences in that, and differences in like what direction I feel like I'm heading now. Um, so yeah, what's your piece
So
on that? Like
yeah,
how's it
and for me,
changing?
I it's interesting in 2022 I had a pretty rough year. Like I felt like I'd literally failed at everything in my life. Like literally. Like I just and that's not true, but your emotions don't
Mm-hmm.
care what is
Yeah,
logical. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
I felt like I had failed as a musician, I'd failed as a parent, I'd failed as like just literally everything,
Any
like
box that
it
came
just
up
felt
was a
that
red
way. Yeah,
X.
yeah, it's just like you screwed
Like a
that up,
report
you
card.
screwed that up, you screwed
I
that up,
know.
like, and I knew that that wasn't true, but like it doesn't matter, you just have a feeling about things. And so
Uh-huh.
last year was a very much like an adjustment year where I got some different experiences that started to make me understand what success actually meant to me, and what you know success to me as a musician doesn't mean giant stages. I wanted to be an avant-garde
Mm-hmm.
jazz musician. Do you know what that means?
You're playing small rooms.
Small rooms. Yeah, it does mean that. Like,
Yeah,
and I'm okay with that.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like I I never thought about the idea of playing arenas or something like that. That,
Mm-hmm.
like, and it really occurred to me last year. Not that I didn't know that, but it really occurred to me. Like I was just
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
I never was sitting around thinking like, I don't even know that I like the idea of being a rock star or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, like
Uh-huh. I mean, that's funny
and I'm
because,
sure those
yeah,
experiences would be very cool.
yeah, yeah.
Like I'm sure those would be really cool experiences, but why don't you go ahead and then I'll
Oh,
finish.
I did have a part of me that wanted to be a rock star on a big stage, and I think it was in 2022. I saw the Red Hot Chili Peppers at Soldier Field,
Mhm.
like my favorite band since sixth grade,
Yeah.
on tour with John Frusciante back in the
Oh,
band. Like,
nice.
got to go see him, and it was an awesome show. Had like great seats, like center stage view, and it was really interesting. There was a moment during the show that this voice came up in my head, and it was that voice that wanted to be the rock star on the big stage.
Mm.
And it like maybe it was, I don't know if it was the exact same voice, but it was speaking to that part of me, and the voice said, that's never going to happen for you.
Wow.
And it was, and I knew that was true. And honestly, whether it was true or not didn't even really matter. But in that moment, it felt very true, and it
Interesting.
was visceral, and it was almost like I went through like a grief process really quick, and I
Mm.
had to go through it quick because the show was still going on. The band was playing. I ain't gonna
Right.
miss this,
Right.
but it like stuck with me, and I had to let go of that idea,
Mhm.
that desire to be the big rock star. And since having that, I find a much deeper like appreciation and gratitude and feeling like that what I'm doing is success.
Oh yeah,
Like,
for
and that
sure.
just going out
Yeah.
and playing the farmer's market on a
No,
Saturday
totally.
morning is
Yeah.
fucking success as
Yeah.
being a
Yeah.
musician. And like,
Yeah.
so it's funny you didn't have that
Mhm.
and like had to still work through that. And I did have that like thing of like the rock star. It had to, but we were like working through the same thing. It sounds
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Very
yeah,
similar.
but that
Yeah.
idea of what it looks like to be successful,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
recognize like how to find that in the present moment, I
Yeah.
think is important.
Yeah. And what I realized for myself is that all I've ever really cared about is playing music really well
Mm-hmm.
and playing with enough depth and intensity that people have an experience when they see my group, me play in whatever group I'm in, and that they leave that environment feeling something or being like,
Mm-hmm.
"Damn, that moved me," you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's what's important to me, the experience of it, whether it's, I mean, I don't mind playing for 5 people in a small club. I really don't. Like, I'm still going to play with as much, you know, potential as I can. It doesn't bum
Mm-hmm.
me out,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, and then if there are 2,000 people there or something, that's cool too. But I'm not going to play less for 5 people than I am for
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
2,000. There's
Yeah.
not some kind of ratio of numbers there. There's a human connection there of like my job as a musician is to create an experience and
Mm-hmm.
deliver that experience to the best of my ability,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
and that became very clear for me that so, and no matter how many nights a week or any of those things, that's the goal, and
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
what is important to me, and
Mm-hmm.
beyond that, the rest of the factors inside of that like are negotiable in certain standpoints, because if those things are right to me, then I've done my part well,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know
Yeah,
um
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, just like leaving the stage feeling like you did a good job is
Yes.
the best you can ask
Yeah,
for
yeah,
in
yeah,
any
exactly.
situation. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I I've never played for 2,000 people, maybe a quarter the size of that, but I know like leaving a stage, no matter what the size of the crowd, and feeling like I didn't like deliver to myself,
Yeah.
that's the worst.
Yeah,
That's the
totally.
worst, is like feeling,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you've experienced that. Like maybe that was part of your all your check boxes getting red X's, was just like walking off a stage or like out of a room and feeling like I or at least for me that's been like, I guess the things I regret, like truly
Mm.
regret, are like looking back and being like, I didn't give 100%. Like I could have
Oh,
tried harder
sure.
on that.
Yeah.
Like I think those are the things, and like face when you're in that, when like in a period like that of like not giving 100%,
Mm-hmm.
like it just fucks your head up. I mean that's what
Yeah.
that'll lead you into depression faster than anything else, I
I
think.
think I've always had a bit of a rule. I can play in cover band gigs for a certain amount of time. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've always noticed that I have this window, and it's maybe 6 months with those bands, like they're those types of
Uh-huh.
bands, and I think the function of those is really good, But
Uh-huh.
what happens is that I I realized at a certain point that on certain gigs people start sleepwalking through them, and I never
Mm-hmm.
wanted that to become my norm,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
where and so if I got to the point in a band or a situation where I felt like people were walking in and sleepwalking and getting their $100, I kind of
Mm-hmm.
got out, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want
Yeah.
to relate to music in that way, and I don't
Yeah.
want to play music that way. I want to be present, and so I feel like there are nights that you're not doing your greatest, but I am giving my all each time. I'm at least
Yeah.
going to put
Yeah.
in the concerted effort to get it there.
Yeah.
And if the result's not always good, that's just kind of part of the thing. But I
Mm-hmm.
didn't
Mm-hmm.
sleepwalk is the important
Yeah.
thing, you know.
Yeah,
And
that's good.
yeah, and it's interesting. I think the largest crowd I've played for, it's probably 2,500 people, maybe somewhere in there. There might have been a one off where I did more than that, but
Uh-huh.
around 2,500. And the thing the one difference that, this is going to sound maybe odd, but like The one thing that I do like a bit more about playing for an audience like that is there's a lot more on the line, you know? Like for everyone in the band, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it naturally makes you as a musician better because it's like if somebody paid $30 for a ticket, you know? Like they don't really care what your day was like. They don't care if the load in was a nightmare, if the load in went sweet, you know, like well, if sound check was falling apart and nobody could get your monitor mixed right, like you know, the audience doesn't even know about those things, you know, let alone care about them. What they care about is I paid $30 for this ticket. Was it worth it? You know, and I think there's a bit more pressure in those larger level gigs, like where you're more exposed. But on the other hand, it's a bit less intimate, which is a funny like it's a
Yeah.
funny reversal, you know, because playing a smaller gig it's more intimate because it's like you really sometimes on a larger stage you can't even see the people, like it's like literally like playing into a fishbowl, you know, like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
looking out and you see a couple people but you don't really, you know, versus playing at the Ruin or you know the Tiger Room. I didn't. It's
Yeah.
called something different now.
Yeah.
You know, Proof is that?
I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd still like to. I need to get in there. I like that stage a lot.
It's neat.
Yeah.
I saw Dixon's Violin
Oh,
there.
cool.
Really cool show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's the one advantage of some of those more high pressure gigs is that it demands more out of you. And I personally like being in that position, like where something a bit more is demanded out of me because then it's just going to increase the experience in some respects.
Yeah.
You know, not that it's like the experience is lesser on a smaller stage in any way. You should still have that attitude. But like the more that's on the line, the more it's like I better really.
Yeah.
It makes
Show
you
up.
hyper aware of it, you know. And plus playing through a larger PA system, like every mistake is amplified tenfold, you know, like
Yeah.
what you can get away with out of your amp on a small stage versus like your fingernail on, you know, your fingernail on the E, A, or D string on accident with a bit of a delay or a bit of a reverb into 100 dB, you know, great. You know what I mean? The sound, like it's amplified in ways that you can't imagine until you're standing there doing it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
So
cool. Like how in a situation like that, the like trade off and the trade off, like the good and the bad is
yeah,
kind of in the same or intertwined.
yeah, yeah,
Like and it's neat how in music, like you talked about the ratio. There isn't like a ratio. Like in every situation, it seems like there's something good that you can get out of it, or there's always something that could go terribly wrong. Like I think
sure.
that's like one of the things that I like about live music and live
Me too.
art
Yeah,
is that like there
yeah,
is that aspect of it could all fall apart and go
absolutely.
wrong at any moment.
The
Like,
tightrope. Yeah, that's
yeah.
yeah, and that's what I love about it.
Uh-huh.
I equally love that. Yeah.
And so it's anytime I would say to my students when I was teaching them, like little kids teaching to sing, that like, hey, if you get to the end, that's success. Like, you know, when they were going up there to play like their first show in
No,
front of
totally.
people, I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, if you get to the end, you are winning with flying colors in my eyes. So how it sounds doesn't even, I wouldn't say that how it sounds doesn't matter, but like try to put that idea across that like what's important is like just getting across that tightrope.
Yeah, totally.
And then then later we could talk about how you felt about your technique and like how it sounded, but like let's just get you across the tightrope first.
Well, and on that note, I think, you know, how you feel about your technique is for the practice room. You know, that's what like after you've gotten off the tightrope, you think about all that because it's like, you know, it's easy for people to you know say catchphrases like learn all that stuff and forget it or whatever, you know, like whatever the thing is, and people act like it's effortless, right? Going back to our effortless theme here, you know, it's so effortless, Phil, your fingers just, you know, whatever, like you know, whatever it looks like, it's like, effortless after like how many thousands of hours of working my
Oh yeah.
ass off for
Oh
years,
yeah.
like,
Uh-huh.
and the
Uh-huh.
reason for that is because in high pressure situations, the training has to kick in.
Mhm.
Like that's
Mhm.
really,
Yeah, yeah.
but in the midst of the high pressure situation, you need to be focused on other things,
Mhm. Mhm.
like you can't be focusing on, well, did I play my scale right? Like
Yeah.
there's an
Yeah.
energy that you have to come into it where it's like
Uh-huh.
you accept what happens,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's part of it. It's like, okay, this I've prepared to this level to this point. Here we go.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then you get in there, and that hour on stage, 2 hours, three, however many hours on stage it is the equivalent of you know 10 times that in the practice room.
Mhm.
you know
Yeah. Yeah, that's for
I've
sure.
always felt that way, that like the gig is the equivalent of several more times of what a day of practice is,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you had to do it.
Uh-huh.
You couldn't kind of redo it or just be like, oh, I screwed that line up. It's like, no, you
Yeah.
stood there in front of a bunch of people and had
Mhm.
the pressure of it.
Mhm.
you know
Well, yeah, and it's that thing of having eyes on you.
yeah,
Like I've
yeah,
talked about that with recording the podcast, like hitting that record button, there is a bit of pressure, like because it's being recorded. The intent is for other people to hear
hmm
this. Like in my pre-recording disclaimer, which I didn't give you the full one since you're returning, I've improved on it since you were last on the show, but I like let guests know that I like to put the whole thing out, the whole conversation as recorded, like
yeah,
no cuts and
right,
edits and stuff. But we have technology so that can be done. I give the option to like, if you
sure,
don't want this person's name to be heard coming out of your mouth, I'll make sure that doesn't happen,
yeah,
for
sure,
your or their good,
yeah, for
whatever.
everyone's
But
good,
like
yeah,
that doesn't. I haven't had to do that really,
yeah,
like
yeah,
to my knowledge, like. But I think that aspect of the magnifying glass of
hmm
there being a little bit of pressure on, people are going to hear this, hopefully. Please listen.
yeah, yeah,
Go sign up for my Patreon, guys.
yeah,
But that little bit of added like attention from the outside world, from an external source, like keeps you a little more balanced on the tightrope.
hmm.
Um, like Jill talks about it when you're getting undressed in a room by yourself. It's like you just throwing clothes everywhere and
Totally,
like
yeah.
whatever. But if there's someone else in the room, all of a sudden you are extremely aware of like what angle your body is facing, what article is coming up first, and like that external view, like it heightens your
Oh
own
yeah, awareness.
view and
Yeah, yeah,
awareness of
yeah, for
yourself.
sure.
So
Yeah.
like going through the pandemic, one of the big things I realized was the importance of the audience.
Mm.
Like even if it was just going to the open mic at Matt Anthony's,
Mm-hmm.
and like most people aren't watching, might be listening, they're more focused on their burger or their pizza,
Right.
but like out of the corner of their ear they're hearing me play my song, and they hear my fingernail hit the E or the A string,
Sure.
even
Yeah.
through a small PA system. So I
Right.
want to try and do a better job in this moment than I did playing in my bedroom by myself for a year and a half
Absolutely.
in shutdown.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
so like noticing that the attention of an audience like does make a real difference. Like those
Huge.
adages of, just go up and live like nobody's watching, play like nobody's there, like bullshit. I'm just gonna
Thank
say
you.
bullshit. Like
Totally. Yeah.
it's important to like recognize. And I heard someone like Julia Hindman sent me this thing from a fellow talking about like the act of like the bow and like thanking the audience
Oh, sure.
from the stage.
Yeah.
He said that is like giving the energy back to the audience that they
Hmm.
gave you
Nice.
as the performer. And like if you hold on to that energy, you're gonna like be wired all night and not gonna be able to sleep. It's actually gonna mess with your system.
Interesting.
And so like consciously
Hmm.
giving that energy back to the audience, like in the bow or like whatever, even
Hmm.
just like like in your own head, like thanking the people who are
Yeah,
there
yeah,
as they
reciprocating.
walked by while I was playing the farmer's market,
Yeah.
like to not hold on to that thing that was like created together in a live performance. Like that, I think was a really mindful way of going at a live
Mm.
performance and like recognizing it exists in this moment and then like letting it go, letting it pass through, and that allowing for like the next one to happen.
Mm.
um I thought was a really interesting view
Mm.
and like perspective on how an artist interacts with the audience from the stage in like a non-physical, like in an energetic
Sure.
way,
Sure.
like that's going on
Yeah.
in all those situations.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Huh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, Phil, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, of
What have you
course.
got going on? What have you got coming up?
A lot of just gigs throughout the summer,
Nice.
and yeah, that's basically it. So,
Sweet, sweet.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you remember any off the top of your head, any you want to
yeah.
plug?
Sure, sure. So this next week, this is the week of May, what, 27th?
May. Yeah, it's the 27th. It's the
Yeah.
27th
So
today.
the
This will
20.
come out tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, this
So,
Wednesday, the 20 May 29th, I'm playing at the Club Room
sweet.
with the jazz trio, and then
Oh,
Thursdays at the Ruin
nice.
with the jazz
Nice.
trio. And then I'm back at the Ruin on Friday with Phil Plays Dead.
Oh,
And then I'm
cool.
playing with the Grateful Groove on Saturday, which
Oh, heck
is
yeah.
at Wrigley.
Oh,
And
nice.
then, yeah, and then just a lot of cool stuff coming up throughout the summer. I've been playing with Pink Droids. We got a couple dates. And
Nice.
I've been playing with Atticus Sorel.
Oh, sweet.
I've been playing bass in Atticus's
Oh,
project for
no
the
way.
last,
I didn't know that.
yeah, maybe last year and a half, almost two
Okay.
years. Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
We've been
Fun.
actually recording a record of some of his new material.
Oh,
Oops, sorry
nice.
about that. That's coming up, and we have a couple shows over the summer. And what
Cool.
else? I There's some other things. I don't know if I'm getting ready to move to Chicago.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so I'm gonna split
Nice.
my time, half time in Chicago and half time here, which is
Sweet.
very I'm very much looking forward to that. I kind of took a
Heck
risk and
yeah.
I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first, but I was up in Chicago last week and man, I'm really looking forward to that
Heck
opportunity.
yeah. That's
If for
what's up.
nothing else, just to see a lot of amazing music for the next year.
Yeah,
Like just to have the
nice.
opportunity to see the kind of music that, really feeds my soul.
Cool, cool.
Yeah,
Is your you've got a couple jazz albums out.
I do.
You did those up in Chicago, right?
That Yeah, those were
The
with the group that I had in Chicago,
Okay,
and
cool.
I'm kind of looking forward to getting with this kind of coming back around. There's a part of me that's very naturally something in between a classical composer and a modern jazz composer, like blending
Mhm.
those worlds together.
Mhm.
And I let that go for a couple years, and just being back in this, I'm starting to write again, and I'm
Nice.
excited about it. Yeah, because it feeds a different part of me that's maybe in some respects the most me, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm. Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
the music that comes through that part of me is refined in a way that other things that I do aren't.
Mhm.
And
Cool.
there's a moment where I'm like, yeah, I think this is probably actual Phil speaking here.
Sweet,
Yeah,
sweet.
so I'm looking forward to having some opportunities to just be inspired by some of the people in that scene and hopefully be able to work with them as well.
Cool.
So,
Heck yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was spinning one of those
Hmm.
albums, I think yesterday or the
Oh,
day
thank you.
before. Yeah. And just like I sat and listened to one of the melodies. It was like the guitar and the sax were playing the same
Yeah.
melody. I can't remember what song it was in,
Yeah.
but I was just like, damn, that's a good melody.
Oh, thank you.
That was just like, and it's one that like keeps going through my head,
Oh, wow.
like, it'll just come back into my thoughts. And
Wow,
when I
cool.
listened to it again, I was like, yeah, yeah, good stuff. So yeah, check out. I'll put links to that
Yeah,
to
thank
your
you.
Bandcamp
Yep.
page,
Hmm.
because people can buy your music that
Yeah.
you have released on that Bandcamp page. And yeah, I'll if you have links to any other stuff you want me to put in the show notes, I
I'll
can
think
put
it
that
through.
down
Yeah,
there.
but I
Yeah,
think we have
shoot
the
me
same stuff from
messages.
last time: the
Uh-huh.
Bandcamp and my website. And
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
social
yeah. I'll
media
go
and
back
stuff.
and reuse that. This is new for me to have people
The return.
returning to the show.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be even easier than in the past. I ain't got to reinvent that wheel. Yes. Unforeseen benefits. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for making time for this, Phil. It's
Thanks.
great
Thanks
to
for
have
having
you.
me. Yeah, for sure. All right.
Thanks again for joining me on the show, Phil. It was great to have you back. Let's do it again sometime. You are always welcome on this podcast. That's my agenda. Sorry, I can't close this. This pen I'm holding is distracting me. So thanks for being on the show, Phil. Come to a show if you're listening. Come out to a show. Come to Soulfest. Go to one of Phil's shows. I believe Pink Droid is going to be playing. Phil's playing with Pink Droid these days, so that's going to be super sweet. And join the Patreon. I'm going to put another one of Phil's jazz songs at the end of this episode, so I'll mention which one it is in the show notes. I haven't decided which one yet, so I'll figure that out after I finish recording this. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.